Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my video review of the Bluetti AC60. This is a portable power station. A quick synopsis is this is a fully weather-sealed IP65 rated modular power station, meaning that you can actually add other expansion batteries to it to increase the overall capacity. But it has a 600 watt normal, 1200 watt peak inverter output. And in terms of internal storage, it is a 403 watt hour. This is a LiFePO 4 battery, and it retails for $599 US. There's a lot to like here, including having perhaps the nicest build quality of any of these units that I have tested to this point, and a few negatives that I'll highlight as a part of this review. I'm going to give you some of the basic details, show you some of my tests, and then talk about what I like and what I didn't like before our conclusion. So a quick look at the overall build and handling here. As noted, this is a 403 watt hour lithium iron phosphate battery. The nice thing about the LiFePO 4 batteries is that they have a much larger, much longer lifespan to them. So this is rated for well over 3,000 charge cycles, and it is guaranteed to hold still at least 80% after those 3,000 charges. So that's pretty much 10 years of full depletion and recharging every day, 365 days a year. So obviously this is the battery should last you for a very long time. It comes with an IP65 rating, which means that it is fully protected against any kind of dust intrusion, and it is rated for water intrusion for light jets from any direction. So in other words, you can take this camping and not worry if it gets rained on, which to me is, I don't know why some of these units aren't designed for that, particularly when they're designed to be taken out camping. But I could immediately tell that they were serious about the sealing on all the various ports and the overall finish. All the materials here feel really, really great. It feels tough. Your touch points feel really, really great on it. And you can tell that Bluetti is confident about the build on this because it has a much, much longer warranty period than any of these units that I've seen before. It has a 6-year warranty, which is industry leading. Anytime you get that long of a warranty on something with a battery, it tells you that the manufacturer is pretty confident about the product itself. And so this is in terms of the build quality, this is a very, very nicely made unit. Now, as far as the specifications in terms of the size, it is 290 millimeters in length, or 11.42 inches. It is 205 millimeters, or 8.07 inches wide, and then it is 234 millimeters, or 9.2 inches tall. It weighs in at 9.1 kilograms, or 20 pounds. On the back of the unit, we have an LED light panel that has a couple of different brightness settings, and then also a flashing emergency circuit. Now, one thing I appreciate is the very logical layout of the front of the unit, including the actual buttons. For one thing, you don't have to hold the buttons down forever to make them come on or off, but they are responsive. They're also, you can feel really nicely made and sealed, and so that there's no water or dust that can get into them. But then also they are all three together, and so you have the main power, then you have the DC and the AC power sections right there. They light up green, nice and bright, and so you know that they're on when you're powering on those sections. So rather than being distributed all over the place, they're in one logical place, and they just work as they should. They're nice and responsive. Everything does what it should. And so I really appreciate that layout, and I also appreciate the flow to where we have got inputs on one side, we have got the expansion ports on one side, we have the outputs on the front, and we have a charging pad on the top. And so everything has a fairly logical flow to it. So a breakdown of the various ports. Up on top, we have a 15-watt wireless charging pad. It is nicely responsive, works well with my phone, even when I've got my Peak Design mobile case on there, and it charges without any kind of issue. There are two 120-volt grounded AC plugs on the front, and again, those are good for a 600-watt total output. More on that during our test. There are two USB-A ports. These are 5-volt and 3-amp output, and so nicely powered USB-C-A. However, it's kind of curious that there are 2 USB-C-A and only 1 USB-C ports, considering how ubiquitous USB-C is at this point. And of course, there's more functionality in that USB-C port. It is up to 100 watt output, and it has an eMark chip built into it. And so it can actually communicate either with the power flow and even communications, can determine that from whatever is connected to it, and so that it can send the right amount of power to it. So it's a very useful port, more so than what the USB-A ports are, I would suspect. We also have one 12-volt, 10-amp car output, you know, kind of the old cigarette lighter style outlet there. On the other side, we have our inputs, including our AC input. You note that there is no power brick, more on that in just a second. And then there's a DC 7909 input for solar or some other type charging methods. There's even a grounding port there if you want to, or grounding connector, I should say, if you're, you know, in a place you're concerned about lightning strikes and you want to actually ground out the unit, you have that built right into it. On the other side, we have 2 places where you can do the expandable plug going into the B80 units. And so you can attach a total of 2 of those. It's a very easy cord to plug in. Once it's lined up properly, you just push in and it locks into place. And then there is a rotating collar there that allows you to release it. And so very easy to connect in, and so that you then can connect up to 2 different B80 units to give you additional power for the battery expansion. I will also note that there is a really good LCD screen. It's nice and bright. It has a modern feel to it compared to some of the other units that I've used. And I also will note that I'm very thankful we have percentage outputs for both input and output, and so that you're not, you know, left with just, you know, indicators or showing just kind of big blocks of percentages, but down to the 1 percentile, which I appreciate. Now, some of the other main features here is that there is a Bluetooth app that gives you a lot of power and the ability to monitor things, but also to change the behavior of the actual unit, and that becomes relevant with some of the additional features that this has. One of those things you can do, for example, is you can set the kind of charging you're going to do. If you're charging from AC power, you can charge up to 600 watts of input, and so for a fast charge. But also if you're in a situation where your priority is being very quiet and you don't want the fans to come on, you can actually choose a silent mode that operates at a lower charging point, your standard mode, and then your turbo mode. The turbo mode is going to be the loudest, but it also gives you the fastest charge. In fact, you can charge in actually right under an hour if you do the turbo mode, though I will note it's only about an hour and a half if you're charging at the standard mode. It's only about 80 watts, 80 or 90 watts difference between those two in my test. And also because you have 600 watts of input and 600 watts of output, it means that this also can function as a UPS or uninterrupted power supply, so you can put sensitive equipment attached to it, and the turnover is less than 20 milliseconds, and so it's enough to make sure that a computer does not power down, and it can protect those things and make sure that you have uninterrupted power, which is another very useful application that some of Bluetti's older models did not have. So as noted, we have the ability also to expand the battery capacity by adding on the B80 units. Each one of these B80 units is rated at 806 watt hours, and so that's double the capacity of the actual AC60. So if you were running 2 of those plus the AC60, you could get up to as much as 2015 watt hours of capacity, which is a lot of battery capacity. And everything is completely plug and play here. Once you just plug in that one cable, when you power this unit on, it also is going to power on the B80. If you are charging this unit, it will also pass through charge to the B80. If you are using the power, it operates as one capacity. So for example, here, you know, I had 27% left in the AC60. I hooked up the B80 to it, and the B80 was at probably itself about 80% charge, and you can see that it jumped to around 65% or 67% of total output, and so it functions as one unit. However, the nice thing about this is that if you're in a situation where you want to kind of rapidly charge, or you have a couple of solar panels, you can charge them separately as well. And even the B80, it does not have an AC inverter in it, but it will function as running some DC power things as a standalone power supply as well. I'll give you a more in-depth review of the B80 in the future, but right now just note that it functions in this way to add battery capacity, and its main function is to add battery capacity to a unit like the AC60. Now in my test, I tested it has up to 1200 watts surge. And so I can verify that when I ran my 1100 watt blender that actually drew over about 1150 or 60 watts initially, that it would start things up. But when it continued to draw higher than what this is rated for, it continued to run at 900 and change. After about 10 to 12 seconds, it shut down, recognizing that it didn't have enough power to run that. Likewise, I tested a little bit lower capacity, a 900 watt portable tea kettle, and once again, after about that 12 seconds, when the power draw remained quite high, it actually shut itself down. However, another one of the things that with the Bluetooth app you have the ability to do is to enable something called power lift mode. Now, I do want to say that the way the power lift mode works is that it will power things that draw more power than what this is rated for, with the caveat that what it will do is it will throttle back the power output to what is acceptable for this. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to use that, you're using it on a device that can handle that isn't going to be damaged by operating at less than peak power output. And so you're going to want things that have a resistive load. And so that tends to be things that have a heating element, for example. So it was fine to do my tea kettle. I ran the kettle and I was able to bring the water to a complete boil, though running at around 595 watts instead of, the close to probably more like 880 watts it would typically be drawing. And so it took longer to bring the water to boil. It took probably it was basically 4 minutes according to my test before it brought it to boil, but it was able to successfully do that. So there are certain things that you can do that fine. A space heater, for example, things like that. You're not going to want to hook up something like an air conditioner, a refrigerator, something that is more complex electronically that could have a shortened lifespan to its motors if it actually is running at less than optimal power. But for some things, it does allow you to run things that this wouldn't otherwise be able to run. So it certainly is an interesting mode there. I will note, however, just on this base unit, that it used a lot of power, about 59% of the battery to bring that kettle to boil. And so used just independently without a B80, there's not enough capacity in this battery to run a lot of high output things. Now, I had very positive results in charging via either solar. We are limited at 200 watts of solar input here, though as noted, you could also hook another 200 watt panel up to a B80 if you were operating in that fashion. But for this, I was able to get good charging performance, not exceptionally because it's not rated for as high of input. But I did find that I could charge very fast via AC if I so desired. If you have the B80 hooked up, charging smaller output things like phones, tablets, my cameras, it hardly moves the needle. It might use up 1%, 2% tops of the battery capacity there. And so you could actually run certain things for a long time. You combine these two units and, for example, if you were camping and running a CPAP, you could run it for quite a long time, particularly considering the fact that if you had a solar panel, you could also continue to charge in that fashion. So let's talk about some things that I like. As I already noted, and you've probably detected already, there's a great build and overall intuitive design here that I really appreciate. It is much better than some of the previous Bluetti products that I've used. I love having UPS mode because it means, for example, I could use this to back up my power station. I already have another unit that I'm currently using in that capacity, but it just would expand that functionality where I could run it in that capacity. The power lift functionality is an interesting one, and so I appreciate that. I also appreciate the connectivity through the Bluetooth app and the ability to kind of tailor the behavior of the unit in certain ways, even to do firmware updates, which I have updated both of these via firmware just by using the app. I appreciate the fact that it is expandable, and that is a really handy thing, this kind of modular design that I suspect I'll see more and more companies starting to imitate in the future. How about the things that I don't like? Well, a 600 watt inverter kind of falls in no man's land. It's really too much for some of the basic things, including phones, tablets, cameras, lights, even a CPAP. It's much more than what you need, but it's not quite enough to actually get into the appliance range. And obviously with my test of things like kettles or a blender or things like that that require a little bit more current, it's not going to be all that useful for that. And so I would have actually preferred a more powerful inverter, even though there's not a lot of built-in capacity for running higher power things. If you have a B80 connected to it, even just one of those, you have a pretty large capacity of battery there. And so, well over 1200 watt hours. And so the ability to run, things for a realistic amount of time. The other thing that I would criticize is that I would have inverted basically the ratio of USB-A to USB-C ports. It would be better to have 2 of the USB-C ports and only 1 of the USB-A if we were opting between those 2 things. At the end of the day, however, my list of complaints is relatively brief. I think that this is a strong value at $599 US. If you add on a 200 watt solar panel from Bluetti, it gets you up closer to right under $1,000. If you add on the B80 backup, no solar panel, but just the B80, that runs you about $1,100 between the 2 devices. And so, we're talking about price points that are really competitive for the market out there, particularly you look at some of the more premium options, and this is just as premium as anything that I've seen as far as the build and the feature set to it. And so I feel like it does represent a good value if that power capacity works for what you're looking for. And that's the one thing that I would caution. Make sure that what you are looking to power is going to work in that 600 watt range, because otherwise you might want to look at a unit with a larger inverter built into it. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, I do have linkage to a full text review. There are some buying links there as well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.